All right, thank you for tuning in. This is the first episode of the Announcer's Hour podcast. Now, a lot of you obviously are not going to know what's going on right off the rip, but essentially, I wanted to sit down and talk to a lot of play-by-play broadcasters. So, without further ado, I'm bringing on the voice of the Miami Marlins, Kyle Sielaff. I don't know if there's anybody better really to get started with this podcast.
There's a lot of better people, Patrick. There's a lot of better people.
There's a lot of people out there, but I'm not sure there's anyone this young already in a great spot in the major leagues. And just with that said, some people out there might not be familiar. Can you give a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so I was born in Orlando, and when I was 3 or 4, I don't know exactly when it was, relocated to New York. So I grew up in New York my whole life, up in the Finger Lakes area, up in the Ithaca, New York area near Cornell and Ithaca College, another very good school for communications, and like an hour and 15 minutes south of Syracuse. So I grew up there my entire life, went to elementary school, middle school, high school, and then when I was done with high school, I went to a community college in the Rochester, New York area, where I had an opportunity to play a couple of years of college baseball. And when I was done there, I knew that was coming to an end in a hurry. That was not going much farther than that. I grew up a massive Miami Hurricanes fan, man. And people always ask me why, and I don't know, other than subconsciously, I must have just seen them every Saturday growing up on ABC, right? Once in a while they were on, but like an ESPN, they were always on primetime television. It was CBS or ABC and stuff. So I applied. They were crazy enough to let me in this unbelievable place, and I have been down here since August of 2010. I'm sure we'll get into all of it, but I was here until December of 2012. Didn't transfer, but I got an internship with the Miami Marlins. Rest is history. I just finished up my 11th season, but growing up, growing up in New York, you had two options. It was the Mets or the Yankees, and I fell in love with the New York Mets broadcasts. Gary Cohen, Ron Darling, Keith Hernandez. At the time, it was Kevin Burkhardt. It has turned into Steve Gelbs. I grew up loving Howie Rose, listening to him on the radio, and I think I just fell in love with broadcasting. To me, watching and seeing those guys was at times cooler than seeing the players on the field. And I think that's why I knew I was in love with it, because I was like, that's odd. Who the heck feels that way? Everybody wants the autographs for the players. No, I wanted to meet the broadcasters. So that's how I fell in love with broadcasting. And I always try to remember, I have no idea if when I applied to UM, because I just loved the Canes, I don't remember if I knew that they offered TV and radio. I think I kind of found out when I got down here, but I knew there was a communication school, but I didn't know if what I wanted to do would ultimately kind of get me to where I wanted to go. But here I am, Patrick. All these years later, now I'm sitting here in these old WVUM studios with you.
Awesome, yeah, I can't believe it. And back to the present for a moment, I mean, what was it like there? Because when people most recently saw you in Philadelphia, just the end of this whole season with the Marlins, and how, because this was a crazy year for Miami. They obviously haven't gotten to the postseason a lot recently, but you were a part of that band that went all the way. I mean, what was that like in Philadelphia?
Unbelievable. So I just finished my 11th season, but when I started with the Marlins, I was hosting the pregame show, and about 5 or 6 years in, I started to do 20 to 25 games of filling in and doing the play-by-play every single year. So to get this opportunity to be the lead guy, to watch a team that nobody had any expectations for, to win 84 games, go 84-78, go to the playoffs, and ultimately succumb to those pesky Phillies up there in Philadelphia, I mean, it's a dream come true. It's just how on earth, So, I don't know, man. I feel so lucky to have the opportunity. I love the Marlins. I'm forever appreciative for everything that they've done for me, and worked with an unbelievable group of guys, a manager and players and coaches, and it was a dream season, that's for sure.
Yeah, and off that point, people have been talking about Philadelphia too, and how much of an advantage it's been in Citizens Bank. It seems like teams get rattled. Did you see that there with that crowd?
I don't know if they necessarily got rattled, but they just got beat by a better team. For 2 days, they got beat by a better team, and it It is what it is. Now, I don't know if I've ever been in the building where I mean, it was literally shaking for 3.5 hours. You could not hear yourself think. I had that headset cranked up about as far as it could go to try to drown it out. Because seriously, when you're trying to call a game and it's that loud, you cannot hear yourself think. So it was crazy. I'm sure for baseball fans watching or listening to this, if you find a better place in the postseason that gets that ruckus, here's what I said. I was telling somebody this. They don't just want you dead. They want your family dead, and they want you to get the heck out of their city. It's not cheering. And I appreciate it. It is just vicious. It is get out of our way. It was crazy.
I can imagine. I mean, there's been so many stories that come out of Philadelphia, and going from that point with the Marlins this season, obviously going into the full-time play-by-play role, I'm wondering kind of, you've seen a lot of ballparks at this point. What has been your favorite ballpark to visit?
Oh, my favorite ballpark to visit? Well, I think you have to start with some of the classics. Wrigley, Fenway, Dodger Stadium. Just to be in the presence of a place where so much history has happened. You were talking about guys like Babe Ruth and some of these others, and just so many iconic Hall of Fame players that have walked through the corridors and the bowels of some of these places, right? Ted Williams in Boston, and seeing the Green Monster at Dodger Stadium, walking around and seeing the history in there, and Wrigley, and oh my gosh, I mean, Wrigley Field is amazing. It's funny though, because now I determine my favorite places by comfortability in the booth. In Wrigley Field, we'd be lucky if it's maybe 4 or 5 feet wide, and you kind of stack your computer on top of things because you're so close to your broadcast partner. They finally, when I used to be engineering the games, I'd have to get out of the booth if one of my broadcast partners, I had to walk out in the hallway so they could get out. It was crazy. But there's so many unbelievable places. I love the annual visit to San Diego. New York is still great. I love going home. I really have fallen in love with everywhere in the National League East. Philadelphia really is a great place. I don't think they ever got the Surgeon General's warning because everybody still smokes, but I do love the food and the culture in Philadelphia. I love going to Atlanta. Some of my best friends in the game are in Atlanta. Washington, D.C. has grown on me over the years. If you like history, go to Washington, D.C. It's a great place to visit. Your hometown. I love St. Louis, seriously. We get to stay out in Clayton. One of my favorite places in the world to eat is Sauce on the Side, the calzones.
It, yeah.
Huh? You haven't been?
I've been. People, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Last time we were there, this last year, the sauce spilled all over me, and the owner came up and gave me a free calzone for next year, so I'm going to take him up on that next year. Spilled all over me. Burning hot marinara sauce right down my legs. Still sat there and ate the calzone. It was that good. There's so many places, so many darn places that are so fun to go to.
I mean, it's a lot of traveling, and obviously at the highest part, it's got to be so much fun to enjoy. But I'm wondering, kind of, a lot of people don't know what it's like for a play-by-play broadcaster. I guess, like, what's kind of a day-to-day? Because most people tune into the game and they think this is a cool job. They see you're announcing, but there's obviously several hours before that. So can you maybe bring us through like what it's like to prep for you as somebody that's at that high level?
Yeah, I should have brought some of my stuff so you could see it, but I'm a little bit different because I still do have some administrative responsibility within the organization, which I actually love. I over the years, I never thought I would want to like put the games together, like people hearing the commercials and stuff, but I still utilize software called Skyview Networks. That's how we disseminate our broadcast to all of our affiliates. So my mornings generally, I will sit there and I'll put the game together that night. And it only takes 5 or 10 minutes, but you got to make sure that we're going to get on the air that night. And then really after that, I start to prepare my scorebook. I'll put all the information in outside of the starting lineups that I can get on there. I usually try to go to the gym every single day. May not look like it, but I really do try. And then I usually, let's say it's a 6:40 or 7 o'clock game, I try to get to the ballpark by 2:33. I'll sit down with the manager and some of the coaches. Not sit down with them, but you chat with them around the cage and stuff and hang out. See some of the players, get caught up to speed, maybe get a lineup. They usually give you a lineup. You go put the lineup in the book and everything, and then you start to fill everything else out additionally, average home or RBI, stolen bases, what they've done against this pitcher, what they've done in this series, this road trip against this team, what have you. And the manager will sit down a couple of hours before first pitch. But I try to utilize as much time as I can kind of talking to the players. Because you hear from the manager, and I sit down with Skip Schumacher prior to, it's the first game of every single series. So I get out in front of as much as I possibly can during the day. When I get to the ballpark, I spend a lot of my time talking to the manager, coaches, and players. And then I would say about an hour to an hour and a half before we hit the air, I'm back upstairs making sure I've crossed all my T's, dotted my I's, and that I'm comfortable to do the game that night.
So that's a good process. And off that point you mentioned, kind of getting those stats and trends. And what people, I think there's been like jokes going around sometimes with like, oh, ESPN's got this crazy stat about this guy did this with his left foot and like X, Y, and Z. Those are probably a lot of times from the game notes. Are you responsible for putting those together, and or where do you kind of find those bits and pieces?
So the communications department does put out terrific game notes, which can be utilized by every broadcaster. So prior to every single game every night, the home team's communication department will come by and give you a stat pack that's infiltrated with pitching and batting notes for every, not notes, but just the flat-out statistics, but also in those pages it includes how the player is doing with runners in scoring position, 2 outs with runners in scoring position, pinch hitting, bases loaded, etc., stuff like that. So that's a stat pack. In addition to that, you'll get the rosters for both teams. Then in addition to that, you'll get both teams' game notes. And there is going to be everything you need. Now, I wouldn't say I take it a step further because this is no different than everybody else. I spend my mornings putting my own little notes together. Prior to every single series, if I haven't seen that team this season, I'll update their entire roster with notes on that player. 24-year-old, third-year first baseman out of St. Louis, Missouri, drafted by the Pirates in the first round in 2018, made his big league debut after being traded to Oakland in 2021. Because on radio, it's different. That might take you 3 pitches. It's hard because you got to say, here comes the 0-1 pitch, here comes the 2-1 pitch, right? Here's a ground ball to second base. Now there's quickly 2 outs. So you find, especially on radio, as you weave your way in and out of calling balls and strikes, and don't forget, I have a broadcast partner. You've got to lay out for the analyst because people want to hear what the heck's going on in the game. So and sometimes it took me a long time to feel comfortable, like almost not feeling underprepared, like that's all you have, right? But if you're listening, it's good to know that, he's a 24-year-old, he's been around a few years, he's been traded once, he's been with the A's since he debuted with for 3 years, he does a great job, whatever. Outside of that, fans need you to come back to what the heck is happening in the game, analyze the game, right? Because it's, I'm steering the ship in one direction. I'll keep it straight. The analyst is there to let you know what's going on, or do you bunt here, what bad call, good call, what do you throw here, right? So that's kind of how it all plays out. Does that answer anything? I don't know.
It's a really good job, and kind of off that point, I'm wondering, a lot of people recognize some of those great baseball guys as storytellers as well, and how do you blend that in? I mean, because you're, like you said, especially with the pitch clock now, it's like there's another pitch coming every 20 seconds or so, and how do you balance that appropriate volume of like, here's when I can fit in this storyline about who this guy is as opposed to what he's done on the field, and like it's just seems like there's nothing black and white about it. It's super like this gray area, and how do you manage that in game and in season?
Well, it's a good question, and I think I'd probably be better suited to answer it in 5 years, because I think I'll be better next year than I was this year. And at some point, you really just become comfortable with yourself and learning how to do it. Like, I told myself when they offered me the opportunity to do this, just be yourself. You're not going to be Gary Cohen. You're not going to be Vince Scully. You're not going to be Joe Buck. You're not going to be Joe Davis. As soon as you get comfortable being who you are and doing things your way, you find that you're really comfortable doing what you love to do. Like, you can't change your voice. As soon as you're cognizant about, I want to talk a certain way, you're not going to be able to broadcast well, right? If you try to really lower your voice and make it seem like you've been doing it for 40 years, it's somebody's going to pick up on it. Like, if that's what you're more thinking about during a game, I mean, you can't do it. But I don't really know how to answer that, because I really do think years from now I'll be like, oh, I picked up on certain little things along the way that, like, it helped me get to that point where you blend storytelling and balls and strikes. Because you're right, we're in a day and age now with this pitch clock that there's something happening like every 8 to 10 seconds if nobody's on base. So as soon as I'm done saying, here's a 24-year-old shortstop out of the Dominican Republic, here comes another pitch. And by that time, what's hard is, let's say it's the first pitch of an at-bat. Here's Kyle Sielaff. He's a 24-year-old Puerto Rican first baseman drafted by the Mets in the first round in 2017. Here's the first pitch. Here's a ground ball hit to shortstop. They throw him out. There's one away. Sometimes I have a hard time thinking to myself, do I pick up on that now? Like, I told you who he was. Do you want to know more? Or do you move on? Because the game is moving so quickly. Do you have to move on right there? That's a question, and I'll ask somebody. And I'm never above asking somebody a question like, do you continue there for a second and say, well, he's had a really great year, and here comes Patrick McCall, right? So it's hard, man. It's hard, but it's fun. It's just got to be yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tough thing to do. And off that point, so you come down to Miami, obviously, from New York. And a lot of people, what I thought, or from my understanding, is either don't know play-by-play or they're almost nervous, or because it is kind of like a public speaking forum.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you remember your first game, either at UM or before, like, doing announcing in general, and how, like, nervous were you?
I remember doing some stuff in community college, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, when I do this, like, if it's kind of quiet, I don't want anybody to hear me. Because you're like, it is. Like, when you start, it's like almost embarrassing. It's like, oh my, I don't want anybody to hear me. Like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want them to look at me, because I hate attention. But the one thing I'm really comfortable at is every night is if I know that pitch is, if we're going to roll the dice at 6:40, as soon as I put the headset on, for me, I get really comfortable. I think you do have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and sometimes you'll be in a quiet gym, and people will hear you, but that's part of your responsibility to broadcast. I think that does take a while to get used to, because it is odd. My first game here had to have been either volleyball or women's basketball. Fun little note, I was on Coach Katie Meyer's practice squad for 3 years when I was here. Yep, I love Coach Meyer. Had to have been volleyball or women's basketball. Then I started to do some baseball. I'll never forget the first email I sent. It was to the program director here at the time, Justin Antwell, who's now the voice of Penn State Nittany Lions women's basketball. I was like, hey, I like baseball. I want to broadcast baseball. If you need somebody to do it, like, I'll do all the games. I didn't know that there was like 15 or 20 people that wanted to do it. I'm just thinking, like, I'll do it. I'm sure nobody else wants to do this. Let me do it. But it's funny because Justin, who now does that, I was also in school with Scott Braun, who's at MLB Network. There were some others that are now doing, like, I was in a crop of folks that have gone on to do really big things, which is really, really cool. So I had to have been volleyball or basketball was the first thing I did.
And so, I mean, going off that point, volleyball and women's basketball, like, you mentioned getting yours started. And when did you start to feel comfortable, like, in the booth? Like, how many games did that take? And especially, I think, like you said, hearing yourself sometimes when you're at, like, a women's basketball game on a Sunday where the crowd isn't as big, and I can remember a few times personally I was like, when they're shooting the free throws and everybody hears you, it's always like a little bit awkward. I mean, how did you get comfortable in the booth, and how many games did that take?
I would say there's days I'm still not comfortable, because you get uncomfortable quickly if you feel like you're screwing up. I am just comfortable doing baseball. Like, as soon as I start to feel uncomfortable, I bring it back to the basics, like the genuine fundamentals of doing it: balls, strikes, outs, who's on base, what inning we're in, the score. I still do some stuff for ACC Network, so I'll do some men's and women's basketball and some volleyball upcoming. And I would say I still get a little uncomfortable. I don't know. I would love somebody to tell me when you'll actually get comfortable. But people would also say, like, having some nerves and being a little uncomfortable is good, because have you just become complacent if you're just comfortable doing it? I guess unless you're just really, really good, then you just become super just like, I'm good, right? So I would say I still get a little nervous. Seriously, I mean, I think that's okay too. It's good to be a little nervous. It keeps you on the edge of your seat a little bit. It makes you really focus and make sure that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's obviously a tough space to be in. But with baseball play-by-play, like specifically, do you feel like, because you've done all the sports, I guess at this point, do you feel like that's the hardest to do well? Because I've heard baseball is the hardest to do really well, and especially with so many breaks in the action at times, you got to fill a lot of time.
Yes, it's gotten easier though with this pitch clock, because when you were doing 3.5, 4-hour games, you were left to fill a lot of time, and our job is to entertain, right? People listening, they want to be entertained, whether you're sitting in the middle of God's country and you're on your back porch in a rocking chair drinking a beer at nighttime, or you're in your car sitting in traffic and you're ticked off and you just want to get home. Our obligation is to just entertain and be there for people, right? Especially in baseball, you become an extension of people's family, because you're there with them every night for 8 months at the same time every day, basically. So you really do. You become an extension of people's family. So I don't know if it's the toughest. To me, it's not. To me, I love football. I can't call. I see 22 people on the field. I'm out. I can't follow. I can tell you there's a handoff going to the right side, but you got to have somebody there spotting, telling you who tackled, where the ball is, what hash mark. It's my brain explodes when I try to do football. Basketball, I love hoops. I love being down there near the court. A little bit easier, right? Not easier, but I guess just for me, I process basketball differently. It's constant up and down. There's very little storytelling, but your obligation is what's going on here, right? So I love baseball, and I love to tell stories about these guys. I love to just sit there and watch the game. I talk a lot, but I would also think there's a part of me at times where I think people would probably be like, yeah, they just kind of chill. And I like that personally. I like just kind of sitting back, and if we crank up the effects feed and you can hear birds chirping or people hollering and the hot dog guy and the beer guy hollering and you hear the pop of the mitt, I like that, because to me it's suffocating if I don't shut up for 3 hours every single day, 162 times over 170 days or whatever.
And I just want to say, out there for people, I remember going into baseball thinking, not that it was going to be the easiest, but I at least knew the most about it, and it gets genuinely difficult, especially that first inning of the first game. You're like, all right, this is you got to really be on top of it with everything and the antidotes, with that time to fill.
Yeah.
But off that point, going back to here at Miami, do you remember Hurricanes baseball and how much of that you got exposed to? Because you came in, obviously there were a lot of people doing it, and how long did it kind of take to get some traction rolling and start picking up a lot of games?
Well, I remember the first thing I was I'll do anything to be able to do some baseball. And I would go right next door and produce the games. It looks a whole lot different over there now than it did 13 years ago or whatever. But I was willing to do anything and everything to get an opportunity. I just remember sitting in the studio producing. I remember my first year being able to go on a road trip. I went to, I think the first trip I ever did was Maryland, Miami and Maryland. I think. I remember going to Clemson for baseball, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. I don't think I did UNC or Duke. Did get to do an ACC tournament. That was a lot of fun. Did Boston College. I remember that. No, Boston College was football. But I don't remember exactly how I immediately got the opportunities, other than I guess we just got a schedule, and a part of the responsibility, like if you were a younger freshman or sophomore who had not gotten experience at, you kind of had to work your way up, right? You would sit in the studio and you would produce, and you would finally start to get some of your opportunities. But that's really what I remember from the spring of, had to have been 2011.
Yeah, and that's, to go off that, obviously, when you're producing, you're not doing the play-by-play directly, obviously, but and you were at the Marlins in a different capacity other than the full-time play-by-play for a while. So I'm actually kind of wondering, because that is interesting. There's a lot of people in this industry, from what I've researched, that do different things or a different path to get to where they are, and it could be what people consider a dream job. But for you, when you're with the Marlins, doing pre and post game, although it wasn't the play-by-play, I'm assuming this was what you at least wanted to be at, or it was the next step, were you almost worried that you're out of what you wanted to be in for too long, or does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And I don't know, because I tell people this all the time. Create your own path. Nobody's path is going to be the same. I don't say this in a braggadocious way. I didn't go to the minor leagues and do baseball because Chris Whittingham, who was my program director at the time here, I graduated in December. He had tipped me off to the Marlins might have an internship available, and they might be looking for somebody to do the pregame show. And at the time, I'm like, who's giving a 21-year-old right out of college the opportunity to do a pregame show? So I went home to New York, and I didn't hear back from the Marlins. And I told my mom and dad, I'm packing up. I'm going home. I'm going back to Miami. It's now home. I took a job out on Key Biscayne hanging nets for the old tennis tournament. It was physical manual labor, and I had done it growing up, so I had no problem doing it. I was actually making pretty good money. But I called them, and I was like, I'm here. Let me interview, right? I'm here. So I finally got the interview, put a suit and tie on, and I got the job, the internship, and I immediately got put on air. I remember the first game was opening day. It was in Washington, D.C. It was the Marlins and the Nationals in 2013. So that's how I created my path. And then everybody's going to get lucky. And I don't know if people want to hear that or not, but the fact of the matter is you have to have a little luck at some point. You work your butt off, luck's going to find you. I worked my rear end off my first year, and I finally caught my break when my manager at the time dipped out to ESPN. And I told them, I lied to them. I was like, I can do all this. Let me do it. I'll do the administrative work. I want to stay. What am I going to do? I had applied to every AA and AAA team on the East Coast. I probably had heard back from 75 to 80% of them, which was great, but I didn't have anything lined up. What was I going to do? So push comes to shove. I got the position as the coordinator of broadcasting, which allowed me to continue to do the pregame show, put the games together, and I just continued. I would handle the live reads and features during the games, and I just continued to work my butt off to where it got to a point where after 5 years, and they knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't trying to kick anybody out. No. I was happy with my job. In 2016 or 2017, they gave me my first. It was a July game against the Cincinnati Reds. I did my first ever big league game, and I was like, man, this is unbelievable. I was 26, 27, 25 at the time or whatever doing a game. Then I slowly start to get a little bit more. In 2018, when the new ownership group came in, I totally lied to them and said, because I wasn't getting complacent, but I wanted to travel. I wanted to be a part of it. And I told them, hey, I'm going to save you a bunch of money. I'm going to engineer the broadcast. You don't have to outsource it every night. I know how to use this equipment. I had no idea. That Comrex device we all use now, I had no idea. I figured out how to turn that thing on, and I learned how to do it off of YouTube. But I taught myself. I don't talk to wires, but I taught myself enough of what things do. I said, pay me just a little more. I want to go on the road with the team. I'm going to engineer. I'm going to save you a ton of money. So my pitch was, I'm going to save you money. And it worked, and I did. And then I started traveling in 2018. I was doing 20 to 25 games a year, and then ultimately this year, they gave me the opportunity to do it full time. So it's been crazy, but I say all that because create your own path. I do not believe, Patrick, that you have to go to low A next year, double A in 2 years, triple A for 5 years, and then after 10 years in triple A, you go to the big leagues. I don't believe that for a second. I believe everybody can create their own unique path.
Yeah, that's a great point. I honestly think, especially with you, you're almost trailblazing. I feel like I've seen more younger people step into those.
It's getting younger
roles, yeah, than we've ever seen. And honestly, like with that, how do you not though get discouraged? I guess when in that process, because there is obviously, as you mentioned, a big break. You got to get a big break at some point. But when you're searching for that and you're working hard, I mean, what do you think are the best tips for people out there? Really, and especially in play-by-play, given it's competitive, but like in anywhere where you just try not to get discouraged when you get rejection.
I mean, I think it's a good question. I think for myself in particular, I would remind myself all the time that like I'm in the big leagues. I'm doing a pregame show. I'm one of 30. And I would just try to be in that moment every day like, I'm going to a major league stadium every day. I know what my ultimate goals are. I don't know if I'm going to get there. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know if I'm going to be back next year. But I knew every single day that I got an opportunity to go to the ballpark and do a Major League Baseball pregame show. Like, for me, that was a win. I'm like, you can't beat it. I mean, that... And I would encourage everybody to kind of take that approach. Like, just enjoy what you're doing every day. Work your butt off. Like, really, really work your butt off. And see where it takes you. And just be genuinely happy. I think there's way too many people in this business that are always looking for their next job. And, like, I don't understand that. Like, that next job will find you. And when the season is over, if you're ready for the next big step, then you apply for it. But, like, when you go to the ballpark every day, don't think about the next job. Think about the one you have now. Dude, we're calling baseball. This is not life or death. You're entertaining people. You're calling a baseball game. So just enjoy it. There's too many other just ridiculous, stupidly stressful things in life. If you have an opportunity to drive to a ballpark every day, I don't care if it's low A, double A, triple A, I don't care what it is. Just enjoy it.
Editing, we're back after some technical disruptions, but going back to it about we're speaking about opportunities and like getting a position because there's obviously a lot going on. I mean, it's been like I think you started the Marlins, you said 2013, so already been 10 years since that. But like, have you already seen in that 10-year span? It does feel like to me there's a lot of new opportunities at the same time to get into play-by-play because now you've got like ESPN Plus and people are hungry for sports. There's more games I think being broadcasted than ever before. Do you feel like there's more opportunity than there has been in the past?
100%. I mean, to the extent to which you buy something like this on Amazon or a little recorder or take your phone, you could go broadcast a game on your voice memos. So not only does that present an opportunity in and of itself for like a high school student, once you get to college, if you're at a university that has athletics, which many do, everybody's streaming things now. There's opportunities to stream things and do student TV and radio and take equipment and do stand-up hits and do interviews. Like, to me, and I'm just being blunt, it's inexcusable if you go to a university or college and you're looking to be a sports broadcaster to come out of there with very little. Because you can make what you want to out of it by just taking your phone and going and doing interviews, sitting in the stands, sitting someplace where you're comfortable, sitting in your car and overlooking a game and broadcasting it to yourself. You can create a million opportunities for yourself. Then if you're fortunate to have somewhere like WVUM, you're literally calling Division I games in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Like, it does not get any better than that. Football, women's and men's basketball, volleyball, baseball, all these games. So there's so many opportunities now, and you just find your way into doing something and just start practicing. There's nothing better than just practicing. That's what you have to do, and that is how you will get better if you just practice.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You mentioned there's so many games going on. I mean, when you're like with that point though, did you feel like with the growing opportunity, like almost overwhelmed getting into it?
Overwhelmed? I don't know if I ever felt overwhelmed. I just remember feeling excited. There was no sport that I was like, I don't want to do that. I was like, oh, cool, volleyball. I'll go do student radio volleyball. I don't know what the heck I'm watching, but I'm going to give it a shot, You let me do football. I'm going to get to go to Georgia Tech and Boston College and Florida State to do. Heck yeah, I'm all in, man. So I don't know if I ever felt overwhelmed, but I would say if you do feel overwhelmed, take a step back and prioritize what you want to do. If you're just doing something every day just to do it, you're not going to get better. But say, this is what I want to do, or this is what I need to do to get better, and focus on that. I do think if you find yourself getting overwhelmed by all of this, take a step back. Just try to keep everything in focus because you have a lot on your plate, especially as a college student. There's so much going on. Just take a step back and just try to refocus on what's important. And then when you find what's important, get yourself back into it, right? I'm going to do some volleyball. I'm going to do some basketball. I don't really want to do basketball, but you know what? I never really wanted to do volleyball. I had fun doing it. You may not love basketball and your only focus is baseball. Go do basketball. Spread your wings. Try to get a little bit better at something. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Try something new. Take the mic from the studios over there and get yourself some equipment and go do some stand-ups. The people in the communications and athletics over there are unbelievably nice. You have an opportunity to go chat with a football player from the University of Miami. Go do a stand-up. Go chat with him. Because I'll tell you what, the first time you do it, it's going to suck. The second time you do it, it might suck even more. But you do that 5, 10, 15, 20 times, all of a sudden you're going to look back and you're going to be like, whoa, that was pretty good, right? And then you're like, why was it good? Well, I'm more comfortable. I've been watching a lot of ESPN college football, and I listen to some of the questions, and I try to repeat some of those questions, and I'm like, oh, right? So, and it all comes back to just doing it. At some point, if you're simply too shy and you're never going to be able to get out of it, then it's just not for you. But if you can get past that first hurdle of just doing it, that might be the biggest step of them all.
That's a good point, and I think I brought that up too about feeling overwhelmed because I know personally social media has grown, which has been a blessing for that side of thing to get more opportunity and show, I think, better qualifications to an employer might be looking for skills. Hey, I can operate the camera, I'm comfortable in front of it, I can do this Y and Z. But going back to the overwhelmed, I think now you got the devil of comparison sometimes when you're getting on social media and avoiding that. Did you see any of that in your career, either starting with the Marlins or even when you're here, well, I'm doing this and this is great, but look at this guy, he's obviously got a lot going on, how do I get there? Did you ever feel like you're getting below people because you're comparing yourself through that?
No, but what I made sure we were doing is if I felt like we were falling behind in aspects that we need to improve on, that we flat out did it. One of the massive things I'm so super proud of is Steven Schramm, who we hired on opening day this year. He does our pregame and he does on-field interviews. Him and I teamed up to conceptualize, usually using the GoPro, to post highlights. It took off like wildfire. I had never really seen that before. But there are certain things, there are some teams that will do podcasts, but there's a video component. Last year I said there's no reason we shouldn't be doing video to it, right? If you refuse to keep up, you're just going to disappear. But you know what? Social media is a massive aspect of society now, and if you're just going to ignore it, you're cooked. If you're just going to choose to not do anything on it, Instagram, Twitter, or X, whatever it's called, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. If you're just going to flat out ignore what drives, at least for me, men 18 plus, that's a generality of who listens to baseball. It's men 18 plus. That's the big picture. There's many, many women that listen, but when you look at ratings and stuff, if you're just going to choose to ignore a demographic where they sit on this thing all day long and they're just like this all day long, if you're just going to ignore that, nobody's going to have any idea who you are. So you got to get yourself out there. You have to.
And do you feel like, bringing social media? I think baseball has been actually the oldest demographic of all. Like, are you glad to see younger people getting into it with social media?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the game is getting a little bit younger. I mean, for 40 years now, everybody's like, baseball's dying. Okay, well, more people showed up than ever this year. There was more money in the game than there ever has been. People are getting $500 million deals. Am I missing where it's dying? It's a billion upon billion dollar industry, and there is some youth to it. There's superstars. It's kids who want to act like those players. We have one here in Jazz Chisholm Jr. People gravitate to that. And where do you see those highlights? On your phone, right? How do you learn about them? How do we hear some of the highlights? They might, like a 17-year-old kid's probably not in their car listening to 940 Wins on terrestrial radio. But let's try to bring it. What can we do to bring it to you? Let's bring it to you. Hey, follow us, and we're going to give you some fun content. It's going to be there. It's going to pop up. If you choose to scroll by it, I can't help that. But it's going to be there for you. So, that's the way of the world. You have to adapt. You can't be hard-headed. You have to be willing to change. And that's what's fun about it. I don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years. Is everybody going to be off terrestrial radio and doing team-controlled productions, and that's where the games are going? I don't know. But when it gets there, I'll be the first one is willing to put my foot in the fire and be like, time to change. All right, it's time to change. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's really a solid point. I thought it was interesting, too. I don't know, it's kind of a strange question, but, there's obviously, it's like people get into a play-by-play spot and, like, at the crew. Doesn't seem to be a whole lot of movement. I'm wondering, especially with social media, is there anywhere you guys, like, analyze, like, what's doing well and what's not? And that can be on the play-by-play side. They're like, okay, people like this, we get more listeners doing this. Or, social media where we're getting better engagement, trying out like this with a GoPro video, like you said, or people like this more. I mean, how do you kind of, I guess...
Yeah, we see the numbers. We see the numbers. This year on Marlins Radio, on the Twitter account alone, we surpassed 3 million impressions.
Wow.
And a majority of that was people that were tuning in and watching that GoPro footage. Like, it's hard to ignore when you're getting 20, 30, 40,000 views on that. It's the middle of June. It's a walk-off homer. And it's me. Like, it's and it's not that it's me, but it's the concept of, let's take you inside of a place that nobody usually gets to see. That's what it looked like when they called that and I heard that. Right? It's this, you need to, at least to me, and I don't know the perfect formula, give people access they're not normally going to get when they get to the ballpark. So come to the booth with us. Come inside the booth. What does it look like in there? What does he look like? You hear our voices. What do I look like, right? Like, what do you see us doing? Look at the emotion from all three of them in the booth. So we see all those numbers. We see MLB at bat, the streaming numbers on the app, iHeartRadio streaming, terrestrial radio streaming. There are analytics, whether we like it or not, for everything. And I think the good thing is that you have to use that. You can't be stubborn and be like, I'm not looking at that stuff. Well, look at it and see what's doing well and capitalize on what's doing well. We recognized immediately when we were doing like 500,000 impressions a month that, go back and look at the videos. It's 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 views. The Marlins' own Twitter account was using our calls and the stuff from the booth because people recognize, like, people want to see that. So if they want to see it, why are we going to stop giving it to them, right? So that's just what we kept on doing.
Yeah, that's great, and that's a great point. And through kind of rounded down to the last few questions here, without keeping you forever, but I think that's another debate about baseball and the game in general, kind of not even on the play-by-play side, about analytics. I'm wondering, like, with that, I mean, how much does literally everybody you meet in the broadcasting sphere have like a whole different take on it? And is that like a divisive thing in baseball from your experience?
No, I don't think it's divisive, but I think there's still a great mix of young and old. There's an older generation of broadcasters that may not figure out the social media aspect of it, and that's totally fine, because those older broadcasters have an unbelievable following, and they don't need that. I need that social media, because whether I like it or not, I'm not that important. I if you're not humble enough to realize that, so how do you ingratiate yourself with a fan base? Now, 40 years from now, if we're sitting here doing this, I'd like to think in 40 years, if I was still with the Marlins, you don't need to use it and leverage it as much because it's like, oh, it's that same familiar voice who's been with us for 45 years, right? And that's what's the beautiful part of baseball is that once you're there long enough, you're an extension of people's family. And people are like, they hear the voice and they just know it's you, and it's comforting. And for somebody like myself, who's very new in the game, I just wrapped up 11 seasons. People heard me for 10 years and doing the pregame stuff and some select games, but like, you have to let these people in. You have to be humble and vulnerable and say, come on in with us. See what we do. See what we're about. Get to know us a little bit. We like to have fun. We're different. We're unique. We're young. We're not the most polished. We're not the best. But come on. Come hang out with us. We want you to be a part of us. And I think that's what people appreciate, is opening that door for them and opening that window and being like, hey, get to know us. Because once you get to know me and Steven and all my broadcast partners, people are like, yeah, I want to hang out with them. I love seeing your stuff, right? I hear that all the time. We love listening to you. We love seeing your stuff. Well, I know what you're seeing. It's the GoPro stuff, right? We know what you're seeing. I think we know what kind of hits these days, and I'm not shy at all to admit that, like, I'm very young. I'm doing this for the Marlins, and people don't really know who I am, and I hope they get to know me because I love doing it. And I love being a part of this community and bringing baseball to fans.
Yeah, that's a good point because I know all the biggest baseball voices seem to have, like, there's Vin Scully, for example.
You grew up with who? Mike Shannon.
Big, yeah, and I remember him, like, always echoing throughout, the car or wherever I'm at, the radio, so going on, and like with that being said, is that kind of like where you want to get to with baseball, and do you feel like this sport more than football, for example, you get that opportunity to connect?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I just want to get to a place where people love what we do and that there's consistency. And I want to. I'm not looking for my next job. To me, I've made it. I'm the voice of a Major League Baseball team. Like, why do I want to be anywhere else? I'm in beautiful Miami, next to a university I went to that I absolutely love, and I've gotten to know some people in this community, and they love what we do. I just want to do it forever because I really do. I think to myself as a little boy listening, you never want to stop hearing from the people you've heard your whole life. That's why change sucks. And I knew it as soon as I got this opportunity. There's going to be people that will stop listening because they were so familiar with prior voices. And that's okay. There's nothing I can do about that. But what I can do is be myself and just do my thing and let people in and be like, you know what? I'm humble. I'm not going to be the best. I'm not going to be the most polished. I hope I am one day. I hope 30 years from now, people look at me the same way I looked at some of my childhood heroes. But in the meantime, I'm just going to be me. And this is who we are. Like, just come join us. Come hang out. And we hope that you enjoy what we're doing. And if you don't, I understand you're not going to please everybody. That is what it is. But we're just going to do our thing, man. And that's what I'm proud of. We just do our thing and we're true to ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody's, I wanted to feed off that. Everybody's got their own, I guess, like, top broadcaster, likely, kind of you're in my case, somebody, especially in baseball, you grew up listening to, but do you have like a top few broadcasters kind of all time that you really got inspired from, and did you ever get to meet them through your circle of obviously
yeah traveling?
It's
unbelievable now that you kind of consider Gary Cohen and like Howie Rose friends because you see them so much. Scott Fransky in Philadelphia, Ben Ingram is one of my best friends in baseball in Atlanta, his producer and engineer Jonathan Chadwick, Joe Simpson, those guys are unbelievable. Dave Slows and Charlie Jagger in Washington, those guys that we see all year long, incredible. Chris Garagiola, who's the grandson of the great Joe Garagiola, who's in the National League Championship Series right now. He was in our AA farm system, and he finally got his opportunity in the big leagues. Consider him to be a friend as well. There's so many people throughout the game that I consider to be friends with. I definitely grew up listening to Gary and Howie. I'll tell you, one of my favorite broadcasters is Joe Buck. I love him, and I know he takes a lot of heat. I love Joe Buck. I love Joe Davis. John Miller is somebody that I listened to growing up on Sunday Night Baseball. John Miller and Joe Morgan every Sunday. To meet him now over these years has been incredible. But so many people I look up to. Seriously.
Lastly, I remember what it was. I got sidetracked, but your future, obviously, a lot of Marlins baseball, and how much do you expect to expand or do other things such as in the off seasons, I'll go call some basketball or some football. How much of that do you think you'll expand on in the off season going forward?
So I do some stuff here. I'll do 8 to 10 basketball games here. I would love to do stuff on the network, just because I think it's fun. I love broadcasting. So if somebody's going to give me that opportunity, well, why would I say no? My loyalty is to the Miami Marlins, but out of season, I would love to do some basketball. Hell, I'd dip my foot into a little football. Somebody's going to spot me and hold my hand. I could probably get through it. But I love hoops. I love football. If I had an opportunity to do some stuff before we really got rolling in spring training, I'd do 2 or 3 of these games. It is that you see a lot of people do that now. I would love to do more. I haven't had any opportunities to do that. I would not pass up an opportunity to do it, and that's just because I love broadcasting. I love being the best I possibly can, and I want that to come across to the TV or radio. That's what makes this so fun to me. It's not that serious. I try to tell myself that so I don't stress myself out. Have fun. Just have fun, and your energy and your passion will come through to the listener or the viewer, and they're going to enjoy their experience with you.
Yeah, and that's about all the questions that I have for you, are certainly within the constraints, and hopefully that'll make this about around an hour for the announcer's hour. And it's been a great first episode, I think, to have Kyle on, obviously the voice of a major league team, already at a young age, so pretty much checking all the boxes, and you're doing well. I think also good inspiration for me as somebody wrapping up here at the University of Miami to see somebody that kind of went through, at least at some point, we stepped on the same stone.
And look, 10 years from now, you can look back on this and be like, see how far I've come? You'll know. It'll happen. I'm telling you. Just work your tail off and you'll see. You'll see how it happens.
And I'm hoping it does. But again, we're gonna piece this together, put it out on multiple platforms, get everything going. But appreciate you taking the time, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Go Canes!